What's up, and welcome to Mechanical Money. Today we've got a pretty nice video for you going over how to solder wires together. It's going to be kind of a back to basics video, but I'll be throwing in some of my own techniques and tips that I've picked up over the years and help me every time I find myself in a situation where I'm soldering. So hopefully they'll help you as well. The way I see it, if this video helps even one person learn how to solder and be able to fix a problem, then it was worth making the video. So, without any further ado, let's get started by going over the list of necessities that you will need if you plan on undertaking a job like this. So, first off, you need to have a soldering iron. First and foremost, if you don't have a soldering iron, you could use a torch or some other form of heat, but you need a soldering iron, basically. For thin gauge wire soldering like this, and I'm talking between 12 gauge and maybe 26 gauge, a small 25 watt soldering iron should do just fine. You don't need to have a $150 bench setup like the one that I use at work. What's more important is that you have a clean tip on your soldering iron. If you take a look here, the tip is clean and it's tinned. It's got a nice light coating of solder on it already. And the way you should look at it is the cleaner your tip is on your soldering iron, the cleaner your work's going to be. So obviously function is the most important thing, but you want it to look good as well. It helps. The next thing you're going to need is solder. And I recommend 60-40, 60% lead, 60% tin, 40% lead, rosin core solder like this. Doesn't need to be rosin core, but it helps. Next step, almost equally as important as the solder, flux. You really want to have flux. It's going to make your life much easier, and it's going to make the joint cleaner and more reliable. So, we're going to be going over the parallel overlap joint. Arguably the most reliable, the most efficient solder joint, and probably the most common across a variety of industries. So, I'm going to go ahead and get started here by stripping back my wires. I just have a couple of 18 gauge scrap wires here just to show you. So you want to strip back about 1/4 inch off of each wire. You can do more than that, but it's not really necessary. Now, next step is dip the conductors into your flux. Nice liberal coating. Doesn't need to be too much, you just want to make sure you get it all. Too much won't hurt you, as long as you clean it off after. Now, one thing that I usually do is twist the wires together. This should actually go before flux. And this way, the wire stays together a little bit better, so you don't have a stray wire that's sticking out in the way when you go to put your shrink tubing over the end. So, I forgot to do it on this one, but I will. Okay, now I'm going to turn on my soldering iron. I use this remote relay here, as you can see. Turns the soldering iron on and off for me so I don't have to unplug it each time. It just saves a little bit of time and it makes it easier to be able to do it right from the bench. Now, I'm bending this wire here to keep it off the ground. That's not necessary if the wire is already suspended, if it's part of a machine, something to that effect, or if you have a helping handstand like this one. You can just clamp the wire right in that and it'll hold it where you need it. Helpful, but not entirely necessary. So, I'm going to take some of my solder. I keep a little bit of solder on a small spool like this, just for convenience. And I'm just going to unroll 2-3 inches for a small gauge wire like this. So, I've already added flux to the conductor. I have my soldering iron's heating up, and the soldering iron has a nice tinned coating on the tip. I can't stress enough how important it is to keep your soldering iron's tip clean. Very, very, very important. So, as it heats here, you'll see a little bit of smoke. That's a good indication that it's almost to temperature. I think it needs another few seconds, but what I like to do is dip the tip of the soldering iron right into the flux. And the flux is so important because not only does it clean the metal, but it also promotes heat transfer. If you're working with a dry soldering iron, sometimes it's pretty difficult to get that conductor hot enough to accept solder. So now, next step is I have both of the wires tinned. We're going to make the connection. I'm showing you this example without the helping hand stand because not everyone will have that. So this wire is up in the air. I'm holding this wire in my dominant hand because it's more important that this wire stay gently touching this wire than the soldering iron is. You'll see how quickly the wires join when I touch them with the soldering iron. I just touch it off like that. It only takes a few seconds. Now, this joint is complete. I could have used a little bit more heat. Let me just touch it again. That's much better. But as you can see, it doesn't take long. Now, first thing you do, turn off your soldering iron as soon as you're done. Leaving the soldering iron plugged in for too long will burn the solder and you won't have that nice clean tip that's so important. So you see this joint is complete. It's complete. It doesn't stick out very far. It's ready for heat shrink tubing. Now this is just a test. I'm not going to use any heat shrink tubing on this test here, but It's ready for heat shrink tubing, and it's not going to make the wire much thicker as it would if you did a twisty end joint, you know, where the guys strip the wire back, twist it together, and then solder it as one. The parallel overlap joint is just much more reliable. So that's a complete solder joint. And the only other tip I would have for you is, if your connections are already made on the other ends, don't forget to add your shrink tubing before you make the solder joint. That can be pretty important. You don't want to have to take the joint apart again and resolder it. Although with the parallel overlap joint, it's pretty easy to do so. Another one of the benefits of this. So anyways, that's about all I have for you. I appreciate everybody watching till the end, and I plan on making videos on a weekly basis. So I'm hoping to have another video up in about a week's time. I've got a couple cool ideas, but I hope to see you back on the channel, and I hope this helped someone. And I'll see you in the next video. This has been Leif with Mechanical Money. Thanks for watching.